Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. This week we've got the picks for week 9 of the 2021-2022 college football season. Before we get to those though, please be sure to like and share this video. Also subscribe to my channel and turn on those notifications so you'll be alerted to any new videos that pop up here on my channel. Without further ado, let's get into the picks. It is a huge week of college football here in the great state of Michigan. It is not only Halloween weekend, it is U of M MSU weekend. I am going to set that game aside and cover it in a little more depth at the end of the video. So right now, let's get to the rest of the top 25 games so we can knock those ones out of the way to get to the big, most important game of the weekend. The number 1 team in the nation, Georgia, coming off a bye week. They are taking on Florida in a neutral site game in Jacksonville in the world's largest cocktail party. That game at the beginning of the season looked like it was going to be a bit better of a matchup than it appears to be now. Georgia has held up its end of the bargain with that incredible defense, with an offense that isn't stellar, but it can get the job done. Florida, meanwhile, has had a bit of a disappointing season. They've got a couple of losses on the year. They can't seem to get their quarterback situation figured out. Neither of their two quarterbacks seems like they're performing as well as head coach Dan Mullen would want them to perform. I think Georgia's defense is going to do what it's been doing all year. I think it's going to stymie Florida's offense. I think it's going to shut down some of their more mobile quarterbacks. I don't think Florida's going to win this game. Go with the number 1 team in the nation, the Georgia Bulldogs, to stay undefeated and move to 8-0. Number 2, the Cincinnati Bearcats, coming off a close win against Navy on the road last week. They are on the road once again, this time against Tulane. Go with Cincinnati. The number 3 team in the nation, the Alabama Crimson Tide, have a bye week this week. So we'll move on to the number 4 team in the nation, the Oklahoma Sooners, coming off a surprisingly tough game against Kansas last week. Oklahoma was shut out in the first half against Kansas for the first time since 2014, and they only had 78 yards of total offense, and they needed another come-from-behind victory in order to win that game against Kansas. After the first half of that game, the Kansas Jayhawks announced that admission to the game was free. Their east and west gates were open. Anyone that wanted to come in and cheer on Kansas could come into that game. That's how desperately they wanted people to come in to see their football team at least compete against the Oklahoma Sooners. Texas Tech just fired their head coach. I think Oklahoma is not happy about barely beating the Kansas Jayhawks. I think they're going to go in a game against Texas Tech and absolutely just beat them down. I don't think Texas Tech is going to stand a shot in that game, so go with Oklahoma. Number 5, Ohio State, coming off their big win against Indiana where they scored 54 points. Their offense has been rolling. They are home against Penn State in a gigantic matchup of Big Ten East teams. Penn State is ranked 20th this year, coming off of their surprising 9 overtime loss at home to Illinois. I told you Penn State was not as good as their record indicated. They were not as good as their ranking indicated. I don't know if they're as bad as 20th in the nation, but they were exposed in that loss against Illinois. Yes, I know it was basically a monsoon. Yes, I know the weather was crappy, but still, you would think that Penn State would have enough to beat who at the time was, I think, a 2-5 team in the Illini. And yet, they can't muster more than 18 points in that game. Ohio State, meanwhile, they've got their offense figured out. They are scoring points in bunches. They are dominating opponents. Not quite to the quality of Penn State, but they're still dominating them in the way you would expect Ohio State to dominate subpar opponents. Their defense has been playing better than they were at the beginning of this year. Sean Clifford had come back from an injury in the game against Illinois, but because of the poor performance, questions I think are still up in the air about is he back to 100% going into this game against Ohio State. I have Ohio State winning this game. I don't think it's going to be as lopsided as some of OSU's most recent games, but I don't think it's that close. I don't think it's that competitive. I think Ohio State wins this game comfortably against Penn State. Number 6, Michigan is taking on number 8, Michigan State. As I've said, put that game to the side for now. So we'll move on to number 7, Oregon, coming off a win against UCLA. I had them losing that game last week, and they did, in fact, win that game. They looked impressive doing it, although they were up by 17 at one point and let UCLA creep back into that game late. So maybe getting a little confident, maybe getting a little too cocky. Well, maybe. But they looked very good despite the fact that they lost running back C.J. Verdell for the season. They are home this week against Colorado. Colorado is not that good. It's back in the friendly confines of Eugene. Go with the Oregon Ducks. We'll skip number 8, Michigan State. Number 9, Iowa, crawling back into the top 10 after that loss 2 weeks ago at home to Purdue. They've had a bye week to fix some of the problems with their offense and to sit and just stew in anger after losing that game, but yet still remaining in the top 10. They are on the road this week against Wisconsin, a team that last week beat Purdue on the road, a game that I did call correctly. Wisconsin is not that good of a team this year. I think Iowa is angry. I think Iowa's mad. They have, I believe, lost their shot at a college football playoff, even though they're back in the top 10. I think they're going to need some miraculous things to happen above them in order to get themselves back into playoff contention. They are still in control of their own destiny when it comes to getting into the Big Ten championship game, though. Yes, they did lose to a Big Ten West opponent in Purdue. They're facing another one this week. I see Iowa rebounding this week. I don't think they absolutely take Wisconsin apart because I don't think they have the offense to do that. But I think they go on the road and they get the win in Madison in what's looking to be probably a cold fall environment. So go with the Hawkeyes in this one. Number 10, the Ole Miss Running Rebels out of the SEC. They are taking on number 18, Auburn, in another top 25 matchup on the weekend. I like Ole Miss in this game once again because I don't think Auburn is all that great. They've got a decent defense, but their offense is inconsistent. We know what kind of offense we're getting with Matt Corral and the Ole Miss Running Rebels. I think they will do enough on offense. Their defense can be questionable, though, and we saw in the game against Arkansas that mobile quarterbacks, like Auburn's quarterback Bo Nix is, can give them trouble, can give them problems. I do think, though, that Auburn's offense is not quite as potent as Arkansas's offense when it's running on all cylinders. I think this is going to end up being a close game, maybe an Arkansas-like game with lots of scoring. But I think Ole Miss gets the job done in this one, but not super spread out in terms of the points. I don't think it's a beatdown. I think it's close, but I think Ole Miss gets the job done, so go with Mississippi. Number 11, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They are home for North Carolina. At the beginning of this season, before the games started, this looked like it was a very compelling matchup. Notre Dame was ranked highly. North Carolina was ranked highly. This looked like it could be one of the biggest games of the season. Notre Dame's season has gone according to plan other than the loss to Cincinnati. North Carolina's season, however, has not gone according to plan. They are no longer ranked in the top 25. They had the opening season loss against Virginia Tech on the road. They lost last week against Florida State by 10 points and didn't look too good doing it. I think Notre Dame is a bit under the radar, coming in ranked number 11. I don't think they're a college football playoff spoiler, but I think they're a good team that maybe is a little bit better than the ranking indicates. I think Notre Dame gets the job done at home. Go with the Fighting Irish. Number 12, Kentucky, coming off their loss a couple of weeks ago to the Georgia Bulldogs. They've also had a week off, just like Iowa has had, to sit and retool their offense. I don't think they're necessarily coming into this game angry, though, because they did lose to the best defense in college football. They did lose to the number one team in the nation. They did lose on the road to that number one team. But they've had a week where they can retool some things. They can figure out what they need to do a little bit better offensively, what maybe they need to do better defensively. They are on the road once again at Mississippi State in a night game. Mississippi State on the road at nighttime can be tricky with all those cowbells going off that those people start, making noise with. I think Kentucky is a better team overall, though, and I think they'll pull out the win in this one, so go with the Wildcats. Number 13, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, coming off a game. They scored 70 last week against Army while letting up 56 against Army. So a great offensive performance, not so good defensive performance on the part of Wake Forest. They are taking on Duke. I heard literally just today on ESPN Radio that the last time Wake Forest was 7-0 and they were going to try for 8-0, they lost to Duke, which was a few years ago, a number of decades ago, the last time that they had a team that was ranked highly and they were in position to continue winning. They lost to Duke. So it seems like every now and then, whenever Wake Forest wants to have stellar seasons, Duke runs into them and runs over them. I don't think this happens this time. I think Wake Forest has enough on the offensive side of the ball. I think they get back to playing better defense. Go with the Demon Deacons on this one. Number 14, the Texas A&M Aggies. They have a bye week this week, so we will move on to the number 15 Oklahoma State Cowboys. Coming off their loss by 3 points on the road at Iowa State last week. They are home against the aforementioned Kansas Jayhawks, who put up a fight against Oklahoma. I don't think they put up a fight this time because I think Oklahoma State comes into this game angry. They were ranked, I think, 8th last week, top 10 on the road against an Iowa State team that wasn't that good, lost by a field goal in a competitive game back and forth, especially in the second half. I think their playoff chances are done. Their chances in the Big 12 are still alive, though, but they got to get through Kansas, and I think they will. It's home, so they're not going to have this enlarged home crowd that Kansas had last week. I think they beat down Kansas. Go with the Cowboys. Number 16, Baylor. They are home against Texas. Texas is inconsistent. They have games like the Oklahoma game where it seems like they've got things under control, and then it gets into a shootout, and then they lose it at the end. And then they have games like against Arkansas where they get their absolute butts whooped. So I don't really know what I'm getting from Texas. They can play well, or they can look like they're an also-ran. Baylor has proven that they can step up in big games. They stepped up against Iowa State. They stepped up against, I think they played someone else highly ranked just a week or two ago and won that game. I'm going to trust Baylor. It's at home. It's in Waco, Texas. Although, again, with all these teams being in Texas, it's not like they're traveling all the way across the country. I just trust Baylor a little bit more. I think they're a bit more consistent than Texas is. They're coming in at 6-1 on the year. I'm going to go with the Baylor Bears on this one. Number 17, Pittsburgh, coming off a big win at home against Clemson last week. They are home once again for Miami. Miami's coming in. I think they're coming in off a win of their own right. They're going north, though. They're going into cold weather. They're going into potentially rainy weather. I'm not sure what the prognosis is for Saturday's game in Pittsburgh, but it's getting colder out because it's at the end of October. It's getting into fall season. Kenny Pickett, Pittsburgh's quarterback, played well in the game last week. Other than the 3-point loss against Western Michigan early in the season, the Pitt Panthers are 6-1 on the year. They're controlling their own destiny. They're aiming for an ACC championship. Now that Clemson is out of the picture on that one, it's wide open for a couple of different teams that got a shot. Pittsburgh, I think, wants to be in the driver's seat on that, but they have to follow up the big win, and they can't have a letdown game. I don't think they will because they're not traveling. If this game was in Miami, I'd be more willing to call an upset here for a letdown game on the part of Pitt. I don't think that happens. I think Pitt gets a second straight win at home. Go with the Pitt Panthers. Number 18, Auburn. I've already called them losing to Ole Miss. Number 19, the SMU Mustangs. They are going on the road against a good Houston team. SMU comes into this game unbeaten on the year. They just beat down Tulane last week, scoring 50-some points in that game. Their offense and the running game was on fire. Tanner Mordecai, the transfer quarterback from Oklahoma, played very well. Houston has a nice team. I don't think they have the firepower to match up with the SMU Mustangs. Again, SMU's on the road, but it's traveling from Dallas to Houston, so it's not a huge road game. I don't necessarily think that home crowd is going to give Houston much of an advantage, so I'm going to roll with the SMU Mustangs on this one. Number 20, Penn State. They're going to lose to Ohio State, as I've already said. Number 21, San Diego State. They're taking on Fresno State at home. Fresno can be dangerous. They played Oregon close earlier this season. They beat UCLA earlier this season. I'm going to trust San Diego State. I have not gotten a chance to see San Diego State play this season, so I can only go by statistics and their record. I've seen Fresno State play a smidge this season. I know they've got a potent offense potentially with a good quarterback who can light people up. I'm going to roll with San Diego State, though, and trust that they can keep this winning streak of theirs going. Number 22, Iowa State, coming off that big win against Oklahoma State last week. They are at West Virginia. I'm going to call a letdown game on this one. Big win in the Big 12, at home, in front of the home fans, crawl back into the top 25, then go on the road to an unranked West Virginia team. I think this has letdown game written all over it. West Virginia is a nice team. They're not good, they're not great, but they're a nice team. They're dangerous at home. I think Iowa State is going to get bit by the letdown on this one. Go with West Virginia for the upset here. Number 23, Texas San Antonio, UTSA. I saw some of that game this past weekend. The beatdown 45-16 over La Tech. They've got a bye week this week. So we'll move on to the number 24 team in the nation, Coastal Carolina. I did not call the game Coastal was going to play tonight in about an hour against Troy last week because I wanted to see what their ranking really was going to look like to account for their loss to Appalachian State last Wednesday. Well, they've been dropped to 24 in the rankings. They're still 6-1 on the season. Troy, I don't know anything about them. I know I've seen Coastal Carolina play in about 2 games this season. I know that they're a good team. I think they rebound at home this week in, like I said, about an hour and a half. Go with Coastal Carolina. Number 25, BYU. They've crawled themselves back into the top 25 with a 2-point win against Washington State last week. They're taking on the University of Virginia, interestingly enough. I've seen Virginia play a couple of times, and they're very inconsistent. Sometimes their offense can rack up 600 yards and rack up 40 points. Other times their offense looks abysmal, and their defense can't stop anyone. I'm willing to go with BYU again, despite the fact that they've dropped a couple of games, including a home game against Boise State. They're playing Virginia at home, which means Virginia's going across the entire country to play in the elevation, in the mountains. I think BYU holds and defends their own home field. Go with BYU. All right. Now, let's get to it. Let's get to by far the biggest game of the weekend. Number 6, the Michigan Wolverines going on the road, up the road to East Lansing to play the number 8 ranked Michigan State Spartans. This is the first time since I think 2010 that the two teams go into this game unbeaten, and this is the first time ever in 113 matchups that the two teams are meeting at 7-0 apiece. So this is a historic game in this rivalry. This is a huge game in the Big Ten East. It's a huge game in the Big Ten in general. It is a top 10 matchup. It is the first time that these two teams are meeting as AP top 10 teams. So there is a lot at stake on this. I've already called that I think Ohio State is going to beat Penn State, which means they'll be still in the driver's seat when it comes to the Big Ten East. The winner of this game will need to keep up with Ohio State and will also be still undefeated in conference and in the division and be in the driver's seat for the Big Ten East championship game. I do not think Michigan State plays Ohio State later on this season. Michigan does, though, at the end, so that adds another dimension to this. Michigan State plays Penn State at the end of the season, so there are still some competitive games to go here, but right now, Both these teams want to keep up with what I'm assuming is going to be an Ohio State win. That Ohio State game is at 7:30. This game is at noon, so this is the earlier of the two games. Let's begin in the stats with MSU. They are racking up 34 points a game this season while holding opponents to only 18 points a game. They are rushing the ball for 200 yards a game behind Kenneth Walker III, who is a legit Heisman Trophy contender this season. He's rushed for 997 yards, 6.6 yards a game, and he's got 9 TDs on the season. Meanwhile, they are holding their opponents to only 121 rush yards on the season. Their passing attack is led by quarterback Peyton Thorne, who's completing 61% of his passes with 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and 251 passing yards a game. So it is a balanced offense that Michigan State is bringing to the table. They are letting up, though, 285 passing yards a game, which isn't quite good. They do have 25 sacks on the year, though, led by defensive end Jacob Panusiak, who's got 5.5 sacks. They have 6 interceptions on the year, including 1 for a touchdown. They are holding their opponents to 39% on third down, although on offense, they're only converting 36% of their third down attempts, which isn't great. They've only given up 10 sacks on the year compared to the 25 that they have. They are 25 of 29 in the red zone with 17 touchdowns. Their opponents are 21 of 26 in the red zone with only 12 touchdowns. Wide receivers, Jalen Naylor and Jaden Reed both have more than 500 receiving yards on the season. Naylor has 6 touchdowns, Reed has 5 touchdowns. So Michigan State is bringing a passing game that can be explosive to the table and a balanced offense with a Heisman Trophy contender at running back and a defense that can get after the quarterback, despite the fact that the big chink in the armor is the low percentage converting third down and penalties. Michigan State is averaging like 70-some yards a game in penalties. That's not good. They need to clean those up if they want to win this game against Michigan. On the other side of the ball, U of M, they are scoring 37 points a game while holding their opponents to just 14 per game. They are racking up 253 rushing yards a game behind their two-headed running back duo of Blake Corum, who has rushed for 729 yards this season and 10 touchdowns, and Hassan Haskins, who has 602 rush yards this season and also 10 touchdowns. They're holding their opponents to 116 rushing yards a game, so it's going to be one of the biggest elements of this game is going to be, can Michigan State's defense hold Michigan's running game in check, and can Michigan's defense hold Michigan State's running game in check? Michigan's passing game is led by quarterback Cade McNamara, who is completing 63% of his passes this season, only 5 touchdowns, and he's only throwing the ball for 189 yards a game. Michigan definitely has a run-first offense. They don't have, with the injury to wide receiver Ronnie Bell, who's been out for a number of games now, they do not have a big-time wide receiver on the outside. Neither of their top wide receivers have more than 400 receiving yards, and neither of them have more than 3 touchdowns on the year. So Michigan wants to do the pound and ground. They want to do running the ball and playing good defense to try to deny their opponent's offense chances to score, to play ball control, and to overpower and impose their will on their opponent's defense. Michigan is converting on 46% of the third down conversions, which is pretty good. They're holding their opponents to only 33% of their own third down conversions, which is also pretty good. In the red zone, Michigan is 30 of 33 in their scoring opportunities with 20 touchdowns on the year. Their opponents, meanwhile, are 10 of 13 with only 6 touchdowns. So Michigan, when they're letting their opponents get into the end zone, which they don't do all that often, less so than Michigan State, they're not letting them score touchdowns. They're making them kick field goals. Michigan has only allowed 3 sacks on the season, so that'll be something to watch. Michigan's O-line against MSU's defensive line. Michigan has 15 sacks on the year, led by defensive end Aiden Hutchinson, who has 5, and fellow defensive end David Ojabo, who also has 5 on the year. They've got a couple of interceptions to go with that defensive performance. So as you can see, they are similar teams going into this game. Michigan's better on third down conversion percentage. Michigan State has more sacks. Michigan's better at running the ball, but it's split between 2 good running backs as opposed to the 1 that MSU has. Michigan State has a better passing offense, but Michigan's defense doesn't let people score touchdowns all that often. So each one has a weakness that seems to be balanced by a strength they have against their opponent in this game. So this is a very even matchup. I would expect a close game. I would expect a competitive game on this one. I think, though, the key to this game is going to be Michigan has a bland offense. Everybody knows they're going to run the ball. Yes, they've got 2 good running backs, which means their running game can maintain its preeminence. It doesn't get tired as quickly because they're not relying on one running back as opposed to Michigan State that's relying on Kenneth Walker III. They do have another running back who's run for a couple hundred yards this season, but the lion's share goes to Kenneth Walker. I think, though, that that's balanced out because Michigan State has a more balanced offense than does Michigan. Everybody knows that Michigan's going to run the ball. It's just a matter of, can you stop them from running the ball? And so far this season, not many teams have slowed them down and nobody's stopped them. They are 7-0 after all. But on the same token, Michigan State's Kenneth Walker, he had a not-so-great game against Indiana in a close win on the road against a team they should have played better against, but that's the only game that he's really been slowed down in. Other games, he's been running over people like Northwestern and like Miami earlier on this season. Both these teams are also similar in that they've been played tough by other opponents. Michigan was lucky to escape Lincoln, Nebraska earlier this season with a win. Nebraska played MSU tough on the road and took them to overtime. So I think it's going to come down to how much can either offense produce against their opposing defense. Can Michigan's offensive line hold up against a Michigan State defense that can get after the quarterback? Can Michigan State's defense slow down Michigan State's running offense? And can Michigan's defense get to MSU's quarterback, Peyton Thorne, and deny him opportunity to hit those wide receivers on the outside? Or are they going to be trying to load up to stop Kenneth Walker and open up opportunities for the passing game to get them? I think at the end of the day, Michigan State is coming in with a better balanced offense. I think that is going to end up being the difference in this game. I think they will do enough to slow down Michigan State's defense and Michigan's defense. Let me reset here. I think Michigan State's defense is going to do enough to slow down Michigan's offensive running game. I don't think Cade McNamara has the wide receivers on the outside to get by Michigan State's good secondary. I think Michigan State's offense does enough to win the game. Close one. I've got my Michigan State shirt on. I'm rocking my home school. Go green, go white, go with Michigan State in this game. That does it for the picks this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to like this video, share it with everyone you think would enjoy it. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on those notifications so that way you get alerted to new videos that come up on my channel. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you all next week.